I want to start out today by just saying a few things here before we get underway. One is to thank you all for coming to this event. This is a fundraiser that we do every semester for the Model United Nations program here on campus. I'm not sure if all of you know about the MUN program here on campus, but the speakers that you'll be hearing from today, all of them went to DC this last semester, and this team here at IBC is definitely one of the best teams in the nation. So you're going to get to see a good representation of IBC's MUN team here today. And again, we thank you all for coming here today. And one just quick announcement for those of you who are in Professor Schwartz's Poli-Sci 1 or Poli-Sci 3 classes. You can check in with him before you check out today.
Yeah, I'm going to circulate. Anybody from my class here? Oh, so much for charismatic leadership. And then there was one. I know. So strike that for the record.
Well, we have some very interesting topics tonight. I hope that you'll ask really interesting and good questions, but I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Audrey Meany, who is going to be our MC for the night.
To thank you guys as well for coming. I know a lot of you are here for extra credit, but we hope that when you're getting extra credit, you're still having a good time. Maybe learning a side that's different than yours on a couple topics, and we hope you're as interested as we are in these things. I guess we're just going to go right into it. Our first topic is racial profiling, which is a really interesting topic. I'm just going to say for all our topics, they can be controversial, and our speakers are going to be respectful and hold their composure and be respectful of the other side. And we'd appreciate it if you guys get upset and ask questions, but understand that we're just discussing things and we don't hate people or anything like that. So our two speakers for racial profiling are Kelsey Mater and Summer Gary. This is Kelsey's first semester in MUN, and she went to DC with us, and she kicked a lot of butt, and she helped us get first place. So she is hoping to transfer to a place like Cal State Fullerton or Cal State Long Beach. And this is Summer's third semester at MUN. She's our vice president. She also went to DC, helped us write a lot of really great papers, and helped us win first place as well. And she's hoping to transfer to Berkeley or Stanford, something like that. So enjoy.
Every time I get pulled over, I remove my hat and sunglasses, I roll down the window, and I stick my hands out so they can see them. I try to make the cop as calm as possible as he's walking over, and I do this because I live in America. This is a quote from actor LeVar Burton discussing his personal protocol for interacting with the police so as to avoid getting shot. We all know LeVar Burton for his educational children's series Reading Rainbow, his role on Star Trek The Next Generation, and his role as Kunta Kinte in the groundbreaking miniseries Roots. Even though his contributions to education, television, and popular culture demand reverence and solidify his place in the annals of history, members of law enforcement often only see an African-American man and a potential threat. Despite his famous face, the color of LeVar Burton's skin means that he, like every other African-American, is potentially subject to racial profiling anytime he encounters law enforcement. Americans who aren't generally targets of racial profiling might think it's fairly innocuous. They might think that outrage over it is exaggerated or even outright unjustified. They might even think there's sound reasoning behind the practice of racial profiling and that it helps fight crime and prevent terrorist attacks. We like to think that legislation has come a long way during and since the civil rights movement. It would seem that racist legislation is a thing of the past. Yet the very practice of racial profiling by security and law enforcement agencies is in fact a violation of civil rights and the Constitution itself, and it perpetuates the long-existing culture of racial division, suspicion, and persecution that never actually went away. Racism, legal racism, is alive and well in the United States. The question is racial profiling a legitimate tool for protecting the general public, or is it nothing more than government-sanctioned discrimination? The definition of racial profiling varies depending on who you ask. All definitions generally encompass the use of race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin by law enforcement officers in deciding on how to proceed in any given situation. Since 2001, Muslims and people of Middle Eastern origin and descent are targeted by CIA, NSA, FBI, Homeland Security, and of course, the TSA. I don't think any of us have passed through airport security without either witnessing or being subject to a so-called random search. Latino communities are the targets of raids by local law enforcement agencies in cooperation with federal immigration and drug enforcement agencies, and Latino individuals in many places in the U.S. are routinely forced to prove their immigration status or citizenship. Arizona's law, SD 1070, has created an uproar throughout the country. It is so controversial, in fact, that it is even described by a UN Committee on Racism and Xenophobia as falling short of minimum international human rights standards. In essence, any law enforcement officer can demand proof of legal residency from anyone at any time. Failure to provide such proof can result in immediate arrest. Naturally, given Arizona's location and demographics, critics of this law have argued that it invites the racial profiling of a very specific minority. African Americans are still targeted by nearly every domestic security and law enforcement agency. LeVar Burton has his routine for being pulled over because, like so many others, he has been a victim many times over of the dreaded DWB, otherwise known as driving while black. This refers to the alleged tendency of the police to stop African Americans far more frequently than any other group. Walking, bicycling, and shopping while black carry similar hazards. Recently, New York City's stop and frisk policy has been at the forefront of this controversy. Numerous NYPD officers who have been forced to engage in this practice have come forward to admit that even they felt uncomfortable with it, quoting their higher-ups as saying things like, "Let's go violate some rights," and naming African Americans and Latinos as primary targets. Aside from the World War II internment camps, Asians and Asian Americans aren't generally thought of as being targets for racial profiling. However, they are often red flagged as being potential spies or for potential involvement in organized crime. Right here in Orange County, the Sheriff Department's gang database has caught the attention of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights and the ACLU due to the fact that Asians and Asian Americans, along with Latinos and African Americans, constitute 90% of this database. The logic and practicality of these types of approaches are dubious, and the practice of racial profiling is not only discriminatory, but outright dangerous to the population as a whole. It creates a condition of tunnel vision among law enforcement personnel, causing them to potentially overlook crimes and perpetrators that fall outside of the designated suspicious groups and activities. It perpetuates mutual distrust and mutual resentment. It creates a divide between entire communities and law enforcement that hinders police investigations and causes civilians within those communities to be reluctant to contact the authorities when in need of assistance. Not only does it discourage cooperation between authorities and civilians, it encourages an us versus them relationship. Most ominously, this type of government-sanctioned behavior creates a condition that fosters a similar mindset among civilians, leading to racist suspicion, reactionary discrimination, vigilantism, and lynch mob mentalities. Racial oppression, ethnic cleansing, genocides, and holocausts were all born from a societal level of distrust, resentment, frustration, and general acceptance of racial discrimination. The most viable argument usually used in favor of racial profiling is that it helps narrow down the otherwise infinite list of potential suspects and potential crimes by using known statistical trends. However, there are alternatives to racial profiling that are at least as viable. Local law enforcement should be trained to better recognize and look for the telltale signals like body language, microexpressions, and situationally inappropriate behavior, all cues that transcend race. This would not only reduce discriminatory practices, it would help seal the cracks that the Adam Lanzas and Timothy McVeighs of the world so often seem to slip through. On the national level, racial profiling can actually be considered completely obsolete. Agencies like the NSA are already aware of the content of every text message we send, every Facebook update, and every email, and every Google search. That kind of information is not only a gold mine of potential criminal evidence, it is also completely colorblind. Thank you.
Racism is an ugly part of America's history and unfortunately still affects many today. Though we have made strides toward racial equality, many racial groups still suffer the effects of our past. However, our deep sensitivity on this matter has crippled our ability to manage threats and criminal activity while ultimately putting our local and national communities at risk. America is demographically one of the most unique countries in the world, and discounting race regarding criminal activity would be a mistake. Having said that, the true purpose of racial profiling is regularly misinterpreted. This type of profiling is often associated with corruption and bigotry, and in some cases that is true. Police officers and other members of law enforcement have been known to stereotype suspects and use their power in corrupt ways. These people are the real problem, however, and not racial profiling. Racial profiling is intended to be one tool of many when investigating criminal activity, and because some people are not able to use it correctly does not mean it should be banned. Heather McDonald of the Manhattan Institute shares that the anti-profiling crusade thrives on ignorance of policing and a willful blindness to the demographics of crime. It is also important to understand the procedures and significance of profiling as a method to solve crime. This technique has proven to be most effective for violent crimes, including abductions, sexual assaults, and murders. Profiling helps to highlight behavior patterns and the general location of a criminal. In addition, the more knowledge about the suspect, the more time saved. In many violent crimes, specifically child abduction and murder, the window for solving the case is extremely narrow, making every minute essential. Some of the most beneficial information in creating a profile for an unknown criminal includes age, race, sex, psychological characteristics, religious beliefs, and intelligence. Columnist and LAPD Jack Dunphy stated that police officers rely on information that may be coincidental to skin color, but not depend on it. To remove race from this list of criteria in solving a case would only lengthen the process and maybe even lead away from accuracy. Racial profiling becomes invaluable when used correctly. Just as gender and age are used when describing a new suspect, race is another important identifier. To be able to acknowledge the gender of a criminal but ignore the race would be arbitrary, especially living in a country featuring much racial diversity. Using all information available allows law enforcement agents to expedite investigations and promote efficiency in time-sensitive cases as well as fiscal responsibility. Furthermore, it remains important to acknowledge the racial profiling that exists. For example, the idea that Hispanics are illegal immigrants and African Americans are in gangs are both ignorant and grotesque statements, but also derived from a certain amount of truth, though it may be slight. Many minorities live in a society much different from that of a middle-aged white male. Though legal racist acts no longer exist, racism still remains an alarmingly strong aspect of our culture. Because of this, many minority groups find themselves stuck with more obstacles to overcome, oppression being one of them. This forces these groups into a cycle of financial limitations. Oppression in certain areas is heavier than in others, causing some racial groups to play into stereotypes. This can be a simple case of making friends with the wrong people, but when you factor in societal expectations and limitations, these things may occur naturally. It then becomes significant to be aware of the geographic occurrences of some criminal activity as well, rather than solely race. It is important to recognize differences between racism and racial profiling, and that they are completely independent of one another. It is until these lines are blurred that the real problem arises.
It's going to go a little bit differently than the previous one. They're going to go ahead and give their introductions as their chosen economist. Just to give you kind of a brief overview of what they believe and how they would handle specific events. And then I'm going to come up and ask them a few questions, and they're all going to answer the same question, just to, again, give you kind of a background of how they would approach different things, different crises, different economic situations, etc. And then if we have time left over, you can ask them questions. Okay, so we have Arvin, Steven, and Daniel, who Arvin's been in MUN for 2 semesters. He also helped us win in DC. He actually currently goes to Cal State Fullerton. He's actually not a full-time student here, but some people love MUN so much they can dual enroll. And Steven's been in MUN for just 1 semester. He was my wonderful partner in DC. We won a lot of awards. It was really great. And he is trying to transfer to either UC Berkeley or Brown. And then Daniel, this is his 4th semester in, I was going to say 5, his 4th semester at MUN. And he also went to DC with us, and he's trying to transfer to the University of Chicago. And they're all poli-sci majors.
Hi. So deficit spending is in the news a lot lately. And most people would think that spending money that you don't have on things is a pretty bad idea. And for personal finance, that makes a lot of sense. You probably shouldn't do that. But I'm going to argue for Keynesian economics and why in times of depression and recession, spending money, borrowing, deficit spending, spending money, borrowing money, and then spending that money is a good idea. So Keynesian economics was based off of John Maynard Keynes, and it was basically created to compete against classical economics. And so the biggest proponent of Keynesian economics is that there are these boom and bust cycles. So business will boom, and then it's going to bust, and there's nothing really that you can do about it. And that was a classical approach to it. It's a hands-off policy. So what Keynes basically did was, we're going to try and negate the bust cycle. And basically, before that, in classical economics, when the bust came, you would just do nothing. You would just wait, and things are going to right itself. When the bust comes, all the bad institutions, businesses that aren't being handled properly, they're going to be wiped out, and then you're going to have a clean slate, and then you're going to have a long, stable recovery. But that's going to be a long-run process. And that was basically the classical approach, and then came the Great Depression. And initially, we were using the classical approach. Let's just wait it out, it's going to get better. Let's wait it out, it's going to get better. But it didn't get better. It just kept getting worse and worse. And if I'm a politician in that time, I'm just sitting here and telling you guys, oh, just wait it out. Classical economics tells us everything's going to work out, it's going to be fine. You have a 25% unemployment rate. You can't put food on the table. I'm going to be out of office in 2 years. So that's when FDR comes into play. Like, he starts using some Keynesian ideas. He brings in the New Deal and basically starts spending money. And the same thing is with World War II. World War II, there's an argument, right, of what ended the Great Depression. Was it World War II? Was it the New Deal? And honestly, it doesn't really matter which one ended it, because either way, it's still Keynesian economics. The government started spending so much money that it restarted like private industry. So after World War II, after we pulled the US out of a Great Depression with Keynesian economics, it was basically the law of the land. Everyone, except the Soviets, basically followed Keynesian economics for a good 20, 30 years. But there is a note of caution when you're dealing with Keynesian economics. It's a double-edged sword, and you're playing with fire. You can't just keep deficit spending. You can't keep borrowing money and spending and spending. That's unsustainable. So Keynes warns us of diminishing marginal returns. So if you use deficit spending during a depression, you're going to see good effects. If you use it during a recession, you're going to see good effects. But if you use it to artificially try and keep a boom going, that's bad. That you shouldn't be doing. It's unsustainable. So basically, when things are good, you have to take responsibility. You have to increase taxes. You have to cut spending. You have to reel it in. And that's your time to work away at the debt that you created from deficit spending while things are bad. So Keynesian economics is kind of like a weapon. You use it when you're in danger, and then when you're out of danger, you put it away. So that's Keynesian.
Since most people have not heard of Friedrich Hayek, much less his economic beliefs, I will begin by introducing you to him. Hayek is best known among libertarian and conservative circles as one of their favorite economists and political thinkers. He strongly opposed the idea of central planning, stating that it would lead to totalitarianism. This is because, according to Hayek, the economy cannot be entirely separated from other aspects of life. When the government treats the economy as an engine that only needs to be jump-started, the effects quickly spread into the rest of our lives. This is where Hayek's greatest insight comes into play. That the prices set for goods and services in a free market are representative of some form of information. Take the stock market, for example. If someone has information that a certain stock will go up in the future, he or she will buy that stock. By purchasing that stock, he or she has caused the price to increase, therefore communicating that the stock is, in the future, valuable. But central planning depends on the idea that a select few administrators and bureaucrats can know the exact same amount of information as the millions in the marketplace, and then make decisions based upon that knowledge. This is why centrally planned states fail and free markets prosper. Coming into the economic world at the time of the Great Depression and Keynes, Hayek saw the cause of the economic failure as a centrally planned meddling of the Federal Reserve. By artificially lowering interest rates in an attempt to extend the boom, the central bank caused a misallocation of money, the lifeblood of an economy. Hayek called these malinvestments, which resulted from the misinformation spread by the low interest rates. The boom and the bust cycles of the economy are natural, but attempting to bolster the boom will only deepen the bust. However, do not mistake Hayek's liberalism for the later schools, especially the neoliberalism of Friedman or the conservatism of Reagan. Hayek does not advocate the absolute laissez-faire as they do, nor the lack of trust they have in the government. In fact, Hayek posits that many areas of the economy should be regulated by the government, although he adds the caveat that such regulation should not be done to influence the choices of consumers. Regulations for the handling of toxic chemicals, for example, or to support labor against extreme working conditions are areas Hayek saw government interference as a necessary alternative to the market. Hayek also advocated for a system of social insurance to spread the risk of events no single person could prepare for, like natural disasters or illnesses. Specifically, Hayek supported the idea of a basic guaranteed income, the idea recently reaching the spotlight in Switzerland that each citizen be paid a certain amount by the government in place of a welfare system. This idea is one that certainly has merit, although it's one that is very rarely considered. In America, for example, the poverty level for a family of 4 is $22,201, according to the Census Bureau. This, paid out to the 46.5 million Americans in poverty, is cheaper by a factor of 10 than the $1.03 trillion spent on the poor currently. This would not only reduce government, something any libertarian loves, because of the removal of the massive government bureaucracies overseeing the current welfare programs, but it would also create an environment that allows for risk-taking. It means that for every person starting a business, going to school, pursuing a career in the arts, or other things many consider to be financially inviable options would suddenly be possible, since you no longer risk poverty or starvation by attempting these things. In conclusion, Hayek, along with many classical liberal economists, believed in trusting the free market to do its work. Many have attempted to criticize their do-nothing policy for addressing the boom and bust cycles of the economy. However, Hayek saw it as a natural occurrence. The bust is simply the fever that the economy is running, a signal that is healing itself from the excesses of the booms. The only way to get rid of the bust is to get rid of the booms. If I may conclude with another anatomical analogy, I would relate the free market to the brain. We still do not know everything about how it operates, only hints. But the brain does work, at least for some of us, and the market does as well. Attempting to meddle in the market while we are still not completely aware of how it works is the equivalent of lobotomizing the brain in an attempt to relieve a headache. A perfectly natural occurrence.
A lot of papers here. They'll be intimidating. All right. Tonight I will be arguing on behalf of Karl Marx, but the Karl Marx that you don't know about. The philosopher that introduced the conduit to the critical method, which is the disciplined systematic analysis of a written or oral discourse, think the scientific method, within the study of social science. So please don't think of the images that you have in your head of Karl Marx. Most of you were taught in your high school textbooks that when they put Karl Marx's name next to communism. And however, Karl Marx never theorized how any form of communism should look like. One of Karl Marx's famous points was that it would be as sensible for us to envision what communism would look like as it would be as sensible for people living in the feudal time to envision what capitalism would look like. Again, Karl Marx was responsible for the most critically acclaimed analysis and criticism of capitalism since its inception. Meaning, Karl Marx did not disagree with everything with capitalism. Instead, Marx understood that there were many benefits to capitalism, but in its triumph, there were some major problems with it. Thus tonight, I ultimately have one burden for you guys. I have to prove that there are some inherent flaws within capitalism, and by the end of this debate, if you agree that there are some issues within capitalism that cannot be rectified, then you would agree with Karl Marx. Okay, so I'm going to begin talking about some problems that capitalism has today. I'm going to begin with this inhumanity, which is caused by a lot of multinational corporations. I'm going to get into some statistics later about the size of these multinational corporations, but let's just begin about their business strategy. The business strategy of a lot of multinational corporations is to produce goods in developing countries where wages are cheap, then they transport it and sell them to rich countries like the United States where prices are high. Essentially, this is a buying low, selling high on a major scale. So, in other words, we're using other countries for cheap labor, and then we sell these products that they themselves are working on, and they sell it back to the United States. However, there's a problem with this strategy. Multinational corporations employ in whichever country is the cheapest, And because of this, there's a lot of issues with labor laws. For example, I would like to bring up Apple. Apple is currently under investigation for a lot of its labor practices. In China, Apple has been accused of breaking 86 labor laws, and they've been accused of having pregnant women working for 11 hours a day, 6 days a week. Again, this is what multinational corporations can do when they extradite their policies, their labor force outside the U.S. because it's too expensive to produce their products in the U.S. However, most Chinese people can't even buy the products that Apple is selling. So they're forcing or coercing other people to work for these products that they themselves will never get paid enough to ever afford for us to buy. So again, this is one of Karl Marx's forms of alienation. He has this, again, I said earlier, he is a philosopher, and a lot of his critiques against capitalism are not necessarily that it is absolutely horrible in the way it works. However, there are some inherent issues in the way it's practiced. So, some statistics about multinational corporations. Okay, so 70% of the world trade is controlled by just 500 of the largest industrial corporations. And since 2002, the top 200 had combined sales equivalent to 20% of the world's GDP. However, these 200 corporations only employed 0.82% of the world's labor force. So 28% of the world's GDP was coming from only 0.82% of the world's labor force. The top 500 industrial corporations, which represent only 1/10 or 1% of U.S. companies, control over 2/3 of the business resources in the U.S. and collect over 70% of all U.S. profits. 2% of the world owns over half of the world's resources. And in fact, less than 1% of the world's population owns 43% of the world's wealth. The richest 300 people on Earth have the equivalent amount of wealth as the poorest 3 billion people. And since 200 years, since the inception of communism, the richest countries were 3 times richer than the poorest countries. Today, they are 80 times richer. And this is a lot of this is has caused by this thing called trade mispricing, which is a lot of countries they host their businesses within other countries because they want to avoid taxes. So they declare where these businesses are owned in other countries, and the money starts inflowing from the other countries to rich countries. So $90 billion gets taken away out of poor countries and goes to multinational corporations. And in total, over $2 trillion every year flows from poor countries to rich countries. In the United States, 1% of the so second portion I want to talk about is that there's a lot of inequality in the United States, in the world and in the United States, and this is one of the inherent ineptitudes with capitalism. Recently, there has been a lot of polarization between wealth in the world and in the United States. In the U.S., the top 1% of the U.S. has 40% of the world's wealth. The bottom 8% has only 7%. And if most political scientists believe that a robust middle class is a requirement for having a democracy, but if only 7% of the country's wealth is in 80% of the country, then do we have a robust middle class? And if we don't have a robust middle class, do we have a democracy? Furthermore, the top 1% of the U.S. owns 50% of the world's country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, and the bottom 50% owns only half the percentage. Lastly, I would like to talk about the inequality amongst CEOs. CEOs own 380 times the amount of money that the average individual makes in their own company. So there's this disproportionate amount of wealth that is distributed across the world and across the country, and a lot of this is an issue with capitalism because it's just something unregulated. Lastly, I'd like to talk about just something that we hear about on almost every news program, unemployment. Okay, so in capitalism, the accumulation of wealth is motivated by profit. Now, this profit is created by competition. And this competition is only works out if there is some form of unemployment. So that means if you're a qualified worker, any one of you in this audience, if you're a qualified worker, there's a good chance in your life you're just going to be unemployed, because capitalism only works if you are unemployed. If you are qualified, or you have to be underemployed and have to work a job that you are not you are overqualified for, because the only way profits will ever be worked will only work out is only if you do not make enough. You do not get the job that other people are demanding for. So, for this reason, if you believe in any issue with capitalism based on anything I've said so far or later in this debate, then you do agree with Karl Marx. So, thank you.
So we are already really low on time, and we don't want to keep you in here for more than an hour because we respect you. So you guys are going to be welcome to ask them any questions you want afterwards. They will stay after and talk to you, answer any questions, anything like that. But because we are low on time, we're going to move on to our third topic. So we're going to do that. Thank you guys. An argument for and against the existence of an Abrahamic God. Before I start, I just want to kind of define some terms just so we're all on the same page here. The Abrahamic God that we're talking about is that exists in the Quran, the Torah, the Bible. So for Muslims, Jewish people, Christian people, a God that is omnipotent and omniscient. Just so everyone's aware, that's the God we're talking about. We have Gibran and Theo who are going to be discussing this topic for you. They have both been in MUN for 3 semesters now. Gibran actually goes to UCI. He's a junior at UCI. Again, people love MUN so much that they dual enroll. And he is actually a double major in poli-sci with an emphasis in international relations and also history. He's probably going to graduate this year because he's that smart, and then he's going to go to law school. And then Theo was a bio major, but then converted with us to a poli-sci major. And both of them went to DC and helped us kick butt. There we go.
Thank you. Just like his major, we will convince him to convert his religion as well. So probably from atheism. Alright, so today, the evidence that I will be presenting, the existence of God, is rather scientific and logical reasons. Now, we have all heard about what it says in Quran, in Bible, and Torah. So let's just not go there right now, because atheists need to believe that in logical and scientific reasons. Now, I'm not saying that I can prove God that exists with some kind of mathematical certainty. But let me present some reasons which could be able to, which are plausible that God actually does exist. Now, generally, my first question to an atheist will be, what is the definition of God? For a person to say there is no God, he should know what's the definition of God. Now, for example, obviously, if I'm holding this paper over here in my hand, and if I tell you guys, this is a pen. Now, for you to disagree with me that this is not a pen, you should know what's the definition of a pen. Now, obviously, if you don't know what's the definition of pen, you cannot disagree with me that this is a pen, because I can convince you that this is a pen. Now, the world we live in today, obviously, God has some human qualities, and that's what atheists tend to not believe in. Now, there could be other reasons that God does not have any human qualities. There could be something else. Many atheists demand a scientific proof for the existence of God. I agree that today is the age of science and technology. If a new object or a machine, which no one in the world has ever heard or seen, is put in front of you, and the first question I ask you, can you define me this machine or the object? Now, your answer would be, generally, an atheist answer, or anyone's answer would be, that the first person who can describe the machine or an object would be the creator of this machine. Because no one else can. We don't know what the machine or object is. Only the creator does. Now, you can say creator, manufacturer, producer. Now, we don't have to grapple with the words, because they all mean the same thing. Because only the person who made it can define it. Now, God provides the best explanation of why the universe exists, rather than nothing. Have you ever asked yourself why anything at all exists? Where did the universe come from? Typically, atheists have said that the universe is just eternal, and that's all. But surely this is unreasonable. Just think about it for a minute. If the universe never had a beginning, then that means the number of past events is infinite. But mathematicians recognize that the notion of an actual infinite numbers of things leads to self-contradiction. For example, what is infinity minus infinity? I don't know. It might lead to self-contradiction. This shows that infinity is just an idea in our mind, not something that exists in reality. David Hilbert, perhaps one of the greatest mathematicians of our time, states that infinite is nowhere to be found in reality. If it neither exists in nature, nor provides a legitimate basis for rational thought. The role that remains for the infinite to play is solely that of an idea. Therefore, as the Cambridge astronomer Fred Hoyle points out, the Big Bang theory requires the creation of the universe from nothing. Now, Hoyle said the universe was shrunk down to nothing at all. Thus, what the Big Bang model requires is that the universe began to exist and was created out of nothing. Now, this tends to be a very awkward situation for atheists. Let me tell you why. For as Anthony Kenny, an Oxford University professor, states, a proponent of the Big Bang theory is that the universe came from nothing and by nothing. But that's a pretty hard pill to swallow for a believer in God. Out of nothing, nothing comes. So where did the universe come from? Why does it exist instead of nothing? There must have been a cause which brought the universe into being. And from the very nature of the cause, this cause must be an uncaused, changeless, timeless, and immaterial being which created the universe. Secondly, God provides the best explanation for objective moral values in the world. If God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. Many atheists concur on this point. For example, J.L. Mackie of Oxford University, one of the most influential atheists of our time, admits if there are objective values, they make the existence of God more probable than it would have been without them. Thus, we have a defensible argument from morality to the existence of God. But in order to avoid God's existence, Mackie himself denied the objective value exists at all. So he said that there are no objective values in this world. Now, I just don't see any reason to think that in the absence of God, morality evolved by Homo sapiens is objective. After all, if there is no God, then what's so special about us, the human beings? We are just accidental byproducts of nature, which evolved from relatively recently on a speck of dust called Earth. And we are lost in a hostile and mindless universe, and we will be perished individually or collectively one day or another. That's what the definition is of a human being. On the atheistic view, some action, let's say rape, may not be socially advantageous. On the atheistic view, if you can escape the social consequences, there's nothing really wrong with you raping someone. Thus, without God, there is no absolute right and wrong, which imposes itself on our conscience. But the fact is that the objective values do exist in today's world. And we all know it. Actions like rape, torture, and child abuse are socially unacceptable behavior. Mackie, one of the atheists himself, states the man who says it is morally acceptable to rape a little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. Now let me remind you, he was the same guy who said that if there were moral values in this world, they would make the existence of God more probable. Some things are really wrong in today's world. Similarly, love, equality, self-sacrifice are really good. But if objective values cannot exist without God, and objective values do exist, then it follows logically and inescapably that God does exist. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So for a lot of you, and probably most of you, statistics are right. You're probably thinking, how could he not believe in God? It's preposterous. It's impossible. It's such a ridiculous thing to think. I just need to find this quote, and you will... Okay, here it is. And I think you'll be able to understand my position a little bit more. This is from Stephen F. Roberts. I contend that we are all atheists. Or, in this case, I contend that we are both atheists. I just believe in one fewer God than you do. When you understand why you dismiss all other possible gods, you understand why I dismiss yours. So, if I'm going to make clear that God doesn't exist, I need to make sure that a few things are clear. If we assume that we can know anything outside of our own consciousness, then we can disprove God using something as simple as the scientific method. To put it simply, let us call God's existence a hypothesis. Now, a hypothesis is true when all the evidence points to it being true and none of the evidence points to it being false. The Earth revolving around the Sun is a hypothesis, but we refer to it as fact because all the evidence points to its truth and no evidence negates it. Or another way, this table here exists, all the evidence points to it being true, and none of it points to it not existing, therefore it's fact. The same thing can be said against the God hypothesis. No evidence has ever supported its truth, and almost all evidence regarding claims of existence in Scripture have been negated thoroughly. In this way, we can know that God does not exist. The very first problem isn't just a problem with the Abrahamic God, but in fact a problem with the very concept of God itself. A God of the very infinite that Gibran mentioned earlier. A concept that he himself said was irrational. The first is omnipotence, being all-powerful. For example, if God was all-powerful, he'd be able to make an unsolvable puzzle. But that means God himself could not solve it, or if he did solve it, that very puzzle would not be unsolvable. God can make an immovable object, only to be not able to move that very object. The concept of being all-powerful is just something that's contradictory in and of itself and just doesn't exist. Omniscience, another thing God is said to be, all-knowing, past, present, future, is another concept that just can't exist logically with the free will stated in the Abrahamic faiths. If he knows how everything's going to happen, then we don't have a choice. We're predestined to our fate, and vice versa. And the last is benevolence, a benevolent God. And this is the most easily disproven in my opinion. God proves time and time again, at least in Scripture, that he is not moral by any definition. He says, "Thou shalt not abhor an Edomite, for he is thy brother." But later on he goes on to say, "He, Amaziah, slew of Edom in the valley of Salt 10,000, and did which was right in the sight of the Lord." Now, I don't know about you, but changing your mind about killing 10,000 people from one point to another as an immutable creature as God screams of human values to me and not God. Another inconsistency, he says, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." Then goes on to say, "But all the young women that have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves." A God does not change his mind on things from murder to slavery, beating your wife and children, women's rights, alcoholic beverages, taking up a sword, and many more. A God is not fickle. A God does not change his mind on a whim. And doing this means that whatever they describe in the Abrahamic faiths is definitely not a God and definitely not a benevolent God. God also commits many direct acts that are immoral. Committing genocide in Sodom and Gomorrah, commanding Abraham to kill his own son, employing eugenics with Noah, transcribing in the Scripture both sexist and homophobic remarks, as well as putting things in the Scripture that, being omniscient, he knew would be used to justify killing millions of innocent people not every day, but millions of people over the course of time. Throughout the Bible alone, God kills 25 million people by most scholars' estimates, as opposed to Satan, who by most scholars' estimates kills less than 100. Even Satan, evil incarnate himself, I think he's a little misunderstood, but evil incarnate himself was created by God, and God knew he would fall to evil. Now tell me creating evil itself isn't the very definition of evil. I honestly could go on for a long time, but I'm sure you're all familiar with the arguments that God does a lot of horrible things. But to sum up the problem with God being all-powerful, all-knowing, and infinitely kind, I'm going to use a quote because Epicurus says it much better than I ever could. Is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then he's not all-powerful or omnipotent. Is he able, but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? Now I'm not intending to preempt the arguments of my opponent, but he went first, so I guess I'm not preempting the arguments. The argument of complex design often forgets the major design flaws in humans, the Earth, the Milky Way, and even the universe itself. Humans ourselves, said to be created in the image of God, possess many design flaws like vestigial structures like wisdom teeth that can kill us sometimes if not treated, as well as the fact that 98% of our genome, I know as a bio major, is non-coding DNA, completely useless basically. So humans are, by most people's estimates, pretty far from the image of a perfect God. The Earth itself, it's clear that it's poorly designed for humans, assuming the goal of humans is to survive, to be able to worship God. Earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, tornadoes, and in addition to that, most of the Earth can't even be lived on. If you take away the 2/3 covered by water and the rest that's too hot, too cold, too dry, too wet, and too tall, you have a very small percentage left. Furthermore, it took God 3.5 billion years to evolve the first organisms. This is the efficiency of a supreme being. I'll take a first-year bio major and give him omnipotence and see what he does. The Milky Way. It's a nice galaxy. It's actually my favorite, but it's going to be destroyed eventually, along with the universe. The two main theories regarding the universe are that either it's going to collapse in a singularity and destroy itself, or it's going to expand so much that we experience heat death. And I know this is kind of hard to hear, but it's what science says. And if he created the earth and heavens for us, you'd think he would have done a little better job. And he would have made more than just Earth and Gliese 581c, which you're not astronomy majors, so that's our sister planet, the only other capable planet of sporting life. He probably also wouldn't have thrown in planet-destroying meteors, black holes, solar radiation, extreme heat and cold, and all those other things that would kill us. Lastly, going back to my first point, there's simply no evidence whatsoever. All the Abrahamic religions champion having faith, which is by definition the firm belief in something for which there is no proof. We would all say that the flying spaghetti monster does not exist because there is no evidence. We would say that as cool as Middle Earth is, there is no proof for Bilbo Baggins or Gandalf, so they don't exist. If I said that I was Jesus reincarnated, you would say, show me the evidence. There's no proof for any of these things, and if we're being rational and logical, we will apply the same criteria to each of these beliefs and not pick and choose because of how we were raised. I'll end this point with Christopher Hitchens' observation. Humans have existed for about 100,000 years at least. Prior to modern health and medicine, the average lifespan was 20 to 30. Most babies died during the first 5 years of life, either at birth or from diseases. Natural events like lightning storms, earthquakes, tsunamis, and other mysterious phenomena terrified these early humans, and you can imagine what it was like, not knowing how anything worked. So this God just sat there in his heavenly throne in heaven, folded arms, and watched everything happen for 98,000 years before finally deciding, okay, it's time to do something. And the best way to do that is a human sacrifice, or appearing in a burning bush, or speaking to a prophet in primitive Palestine. The news would take so long to spread that it still hasn't reached large parts of the world. Some design, huh? We must ask ourselves, what is more likely? Whether a flawed God created flawed humans, or flawed humans created a flawed God. Thank you.
Ask them anything, any questions you might have about their speeches, about their opinions. They don't necessarily take these sides, but just anything you want to ask them, feel free to raise your hand and oh, come on. That's a really controversial topic. No one has anything? Kale, do you have questions?
Can I just, well, since nobody, I don't want to have to be faculty member filling the student vacuum here, but I guess. Would you, either the two panelists or both comment on the Bloomberg stop and frisk policy? It seems like a rather paradoxical role for the mayor to take because he's been so liberal and progressive on so many other issues, and being associated with this seems really somewhat surprising. And I'm wondering how the two panelists, sui generis in their heart of hearts, feel about that policy. Is it productive, and what have been some of the results, as far as you know, of the enforcement of this policy? Is still in effect, I take it. It has not been rescinded, in spite of a lot of agitation and litigation, especially by the ACLU. Would you maybe comment on the on your personal view?
As far as that goes, I don't have too much of an understanding of it other than the general outline, but I feel that it touches base on with a lot of things that I had mentioned about the getting into the wrong hands. So you can make as many laws and guidelines suggesting to not be racist, but those beliefs are still going to lie with certain people, whether it's legal or not. So as far as the stop and frisk policy goes, there's only so much that you can do to prevent racist actions from taking place. So for certain people, it might be they are racist against a particular group. And it also might be something that might be a little bit more practical to some of us, being the way that they're dressed, the way that they're acting, stuff like that. But as far as it goes with the racist issues behind it, we can put as many laws into place as we want or as we can, but it won't ultimately get rid of racism altogether. It'll just make it illegal. So it just falls back to people abusing the power that they have, and it's just a matter, I guess, of other steps being taken to prevent that power from being abused. Because naturally, if you have a law in place that allows something to happen, you're going to have to monitor the people that use that power when it's a matter of their opinion that gets to judge who gets stopped and who doesn't. So race definitely would trickle into that, and is a huge issue, but it's in association with racial profiling. I guess I find a little bit of a difference there. It still lies within the individual that's conducting the search.
Well, from what I've read about it, it's my understanding that nowhere in the actual policy as it's written does it say to target specific groups of people. However, the uproar comes from the fact that though the stop and frisk policy is theoretically supposed to be implemented in any area in New York City, be it wealthy or it tends to take place in very specific parts of town much more frequently than in others, which at least by all appearances makes it look like certain groups are targeted. And as far as Bloomberg justifying or being on the side of that law, I think it comes from a place of him just wanting to stop crime, and maybe the fact that being that he doesn't see things on a ground level the way that the police do or the way that civilians do, he probably thinks there's more validity in it than there.
Could you just say, would you say there might be a bright line between racial animus and the standard of reasonable suspicion, which according to search and seizure law, police officers can exercise rather than just arbitrary racial profiling? Reasonable suspicion is an acceptable standard for certain kinds of searches, especially automobile searches, as opposed to proving racial animus. And I think everybody would probably disagree. That certainly doesn't seem to be a part of that stop and frisk policy, as
right.
you just indicated.
Yeah, like I said, it's just because it seems so much more frequent among certain groups and in certain areas than with others. It's hard to not see a racial aspect to it, because you don't really see cops standing on the corner of, say, Beverly Drive, stopping and frisking people. I mean, that's a bad example because that's Los Angeles, but I'm not familiar with New York street names.
Good point.
So, but yeah, I think maybe individual cops, individual precincts even, don't necessarily say to target someone based on their ethnicity or race or religion, etc. But it happens that way so often, and there are precincts and cops who do have that mentality that it's really hard to figure out where that line is.
Well done. Thank you.
Any other questions to build off that?
I guess you make the argument that the benefits of racial profiling outweigh what happens when people abuse that right. But how exactly do you think that the benefit of, an investigation and how race plays an important part just as much as gender does or age does, how do you think that outweighs more than the amount that racial profiling gets abused in the status quo?
I mean, that's going to be subject to the individual and what their personal relationship is with the matter. From a very general stance, you can look at circumstances where there's been a witness in a situation, and if they observed the race of whatever the suspect was, but when we're unable to say that, that would obviously lead to just a lengthier investigation process. It's hard to say if that outweighs one or the other, because you would have to do a lot more studying and research into the field of what minorities suffer from when law enforcement gets involved for reasons that are unnecessary. And that's much more, and some people handle it better than others too. Other people are like, oh yeah, it's just because I'm X race. Where other people that might not be familiar with American culture aren't used to being an outcast or aren't used to feeling a certain way and might be much more offended by the matter. I personally value individualism very much, so it's really hard for me to say that pinpointing an individual's race as they are a suspect is more important than someone's feeling of a particular race. I'm just trying to take the legal approach from it, and as long as racism is around, it's going to be used in ways that it shouldn't. So it's just a matter of time until that's fixed. But I can't say that, you know, being able to use race in a legal matter as just an identifier is any more valuable than how people are treated. Does that answer your question?
Anything for
Hopefully.
either of them? Yeah, if they did anything right, you might have
We're
one.
not talking about.
Maybe not. No. Anyone have questions? Comments?
Oh,
Anyone want
well,
to try to prove them wrong?
exceedingly well done. Yes.
I was wondering if you could repeat a quote that you had.
I had several quotes.
There was the one, I think God is not critical.
Well, that was in my, I said a God wouldn't be fickle and changes morals from one point to another.
You can have to say something.
Oh, okay. I said a God is not fickle. A God does not change his mind on a whim. And doing this means that the immutable, you know, permanent, omnipotent God described in the Abrahamic faith does not exist. Something lighthearted.
Anyone else? Yeah.
That's where you're on the left. You're saying how God is the beginning, right? And you pray the Big Bang.
What was it?
You're saying how God is the beginning and the Big Bang is created.
I never. Do you want to complete your question?
Yeah, so who made God?
So I never said that God is the beginning. I said the Big Bang Theory and the universe, according to atheistic view, is infinite, which means that it has to be somewhere, the beginning has to be somewhere. Now, what I said in my beginning paragraph is that obviously what atheists believe that there is no God based on the definition of God that we have in today's world, that he has human qualities. Now, even in Quran and in Bible, it says that do not imagine God as a human being. Okay, so you cannot give him human qualities. If you were to give him human qualities, that would obviously mean that he can die, he can be born, he can feel sick. Now, that's not what we can do. So, which means that we don't know yet. So, obviously, in Quran and Bible, it says that God was always there. So, everything else, according to atheistic view, is infinite, which means that it just came out of nowhere and it was just created from nothing.
I think
So that's what
if I'm going to complete this question, he's saying like, well, you can't say that the universe can't be infinite and then say that God can be infinite.
I never did.
Atheists don't argue that the universe is infinite. They argue that it's finite stars.
No, atheists believe that they had an infinite start, which means that the universe came out of being from nothing. So they say Big Bang Theory, and even then for Big Bang Theory, they said that it came out of nowhere, and it just happened. So the question is, how did it happen, and where did it happen from? Now, obviously, we do have miracles in life, and all the prophets, and even atheists, such as J.L. Mackie, the one I stated, even he believed in prophets. So obviously, atheists, to a certain extent, they do believe, yeah, there were prophets. There was someone named Jesus. There was someone named Muhammad. Now, they do believe in prophets, and miracles happen to them. To an extent, they even do believe that miracles did happen to them. Now, obviously, miracles cannot just happen to you out of nowhere. They have to happen to some human being, not like a Big Bang Theory that they just created out of nowhere and just came out of nowhere from no one's existence. So,
not to turn this into a back and forth debate up here real quick,
it's already.
but Stephen Hawking has gone on record saying that while something from nothing is a very abstract concept, I'm going to take his word, being as he's a little bit smarter than me, that something can come of nothing and that science can explain that the universe started from nothing. And what was your second one? Lost my train of thought.
Isn't that just believing? So the scientific community in one way has the same faith, just in a different type of God.
Well, the thing is, well, that's a common argument, yeah.
Atheist philosophers say that science is their religion. Atheist philosophers say that science is their religion, just like Muslims say that.
If I could respond to that, first of all, atheists don't say anything. Atheists is just not believing in God. It doesn't mean that you believe in science or anything else. But to answer like the scientific worldview on things, that, yeah, scientists will be the first to admit they don't know what the hell happened back then. I mean, and we're far away from knowing it. But science is strong in saying that, hey, we don't know right now. We're working towards it. We used to not know how things work. We used to not even have the slightest idea how gravity functioned, how time functioned, how electricity functioned. Scientists are comfortable in saying, we don't know right now. But scientists say, let's work at it, and let's not just conclude God because we don't know.
Yeah, but would you agree that there is a extent of belief in what you believe in?
Well, the thing is, science has a bunch of intermediate steps and checkpoints to make sure that those steps are believable, whereas
so they are believable. Thank you.
We weren't believing it? We weren't believing it? We weren't believing anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I think that we can all say that if we go to a philosophic level, every single thing you will ever say is because you believe. I believe that this is here. I believe that his name is Gibran. I believe there's a clock over there. Everything points to those, but I'm never, ever, ever, ever going to know anything for sure.
Yeah, I kind of skipped over Descartes because then things get weird. Ron doesn't exist if I don't think he exists. You know, it devolves into. I mean, if I just think really hard, no, it kind of devolves into kind of like a sad, you know, we only know our own consciousness and our own thoughts. Nothing exists. Nothing matters. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question for you. Towards the end of your speech, you were saying, kind of in a negative light, that we are just, you know, humans on a speck of sunlight, on some type of sunbeam, and that we're so insignificant in the scheme of things. However, I present to you two different worlds, one where there is a God, and he is omnipotent and omniscient, and he knows everything, where 80% of the world lives on less than $10 a day, and rape and murder exists. Or you look at a world where there is no God, and we are in happy accident that are able to perceive and are able to like feel sunlight and speak and communicate even throughout all of this turmoil and all of this suffering. So what do you think would be the better world?
So let me just correct you over there for a second. You might have misunderstood me. So when I was talking about Fred Hoyle, one of the philosophers, it originated from him, so that's his words, not mine. So I didn't say that, but to defend, no, that's fine. So what was the question? So what was the first part of the question again?
My first part of the question is, yes, we could be very insignificant in the scheme of things when we look at how vast the universe is and how tiny we are. And it was spoken in kind of like that could be a bad thing, that at the end of the day we aren't that as significant as we believe we are. However, if we compare it in two worlds where there is a God who would be able to like see the suffering and do nothing about it and exist, as opposed to a world where there is no God, but however we are an accident and we are insignificant, but we are able to, in our short lives, be able to experience such amazing things that we are allowed to experience, what's the better world?
Right. So going back to my opponent, he believed that God is all-knowing. So considering to your point that he does know that there is poverty, there is suffering in this world, and people are suffering. Not everyone lives in the United States of America with all the privileges. Now, in Quran and in Bible, it says the exact same thing. God says, I am all-knowing, I foresee everything, I have destined a fate for you in your soul, which you can change by your actions. Now, since God said that, yes, he is all-knowing, but that doesn't mean that he has everything, everything is destined, everything is finalized, that this guy will be poor for his entire life, and he will die the same way. God adds on by saying that you can change your fate He has just destined a fate for you, which you can change by your actions. Now, for the people who are poor and they're suffering, obviously God doesn't know about them. But God has obviously destined some people to help them. Now, there are that we call miracles, obviously, in philosophical language of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. That there are people who will help them. Now, why do we make donations? What do you think? What's the first thing that comes in your mind when you help a beggar or help a poor person? You make a donation. What's the first thing that comes in your mind? That this $1 might help that guy because he's poor and I have a lot and I don't need that dollar. So that will help him. So obviously, why did you think that? Because you have some feelings towards him. That's humanity. And humanity is being taught in Quran and Bible and Torah by God. So which is why you help them to cut down poverty. Now, I know that no one thinks in that much detail that, oh my God, this $1 will cut down poverty in Nicaragua and Kenya and whatnot. But you just aim to do that you help someone.
Just a quick response. I would just say that's kind of a messed up system where you have to have, so much of the world suffering just to allow some privileged people to help out these people so that they can show God that they are good people at the expense of all these people being raped, murdered, innocently, children that never deserved it.
Right. Well, in Islam, the Prophet Muhammad, he stated, your actions are judged by your intentions. As you said, that not everyone is wealthy and not everyone's poor. There is a certain ratio of that. So obviously, some people do have money and they like to help people. Now, some people do have money and they don't give out any donation. They don't help anyone. So obviously, there are bad people and there are good people everywhere, even in atheistic view. So we do believe that. So God does say that in Quran, that there are bad people and there are good people. But that's your fate. You change that. Now it's in your hand. Do you change that in a good way or a bad way? God has just destined you a fate that tears your blank paper. I'll give you a pen. Write it out how you want me to judge you at the end of the world. Simple.
Okay, it's optional at this point if y'all want to stay and listen to more questions or ask any more questions. We're not going to force you to stay or anything. But if you do have questions or want to ask any of the speakers